I'm Dave Park, rank and file anthology film archives worker at Local 2110 and co-chairperson of UAWD. I've been a UAWD member since 2022 and was excited to be part of a rank and file political formation in UAW, where members from every sector in our union were organizing across workplaces and industries. At that time, UAWD was a nationally focused organization aiming to win reforms in UAW's highest offices and bureaucracies, culminating in the victory of our slate at the first ever direct election of our International Executive Board, which included Shawn Fain as president of UAW. But after our victories, it also started to become clear how insufficient the movement for simple reform in our union could be. Our newly elected leaders led an impressive Big Three strike after decades of perpetuating service unionism and concessions, but still it was a campaign that was run from the top down with significant holes. The debate over that deal and how to frame it opened up a political divide in UAWD between a group of leaders seeking a more limited notion of reform and many of our core active members and leaders who believe that a militant, democratic movement could only be built with a more political, expansive commitment to developing class struggle unionism built from the shop floor up. This rift developed into a split last year. Since then, hundreds of UAWD members and supporters decided to keep building our organization with a political grounding in class struggle unionism, anchored by 5 principles: militancy, worker control, democracy, political independence, and working class solidarity in our communities and across borders. This political perspective informs all of our organizing activity and helped us develop a distinct strategy for this year's UAW Constitutional Convention, or CONCON, compared to our presence 4 years earlier. Our perspectives and tactics, which were developed by months of regular member engagement, understood the CONCON to be a highly controlled bureaucratic space. We knew the chance of our organization winning specific, narrow reforms or demands would be near impossible with our current capacity and resources if we only focused on recruiting members to run as delegates or trying to whip votes hours before certain moments in the convention. Instead, we used the convention to broadcast the principles of our class struggle vision while speaking to specific material realities affecting the U.S. working class, especially how to fight layoffs and fight ICE. Later on in today's panel, we will hear more about the ways this ultimately resulted in the divestment victory. In our view, this victory cannot be understood as just a single vote at UAW's Constitutional Convention. The conditions that led to the majority of the delegates in that room raising their voice to stand with Palestine are the result of a militant layer of workers building the struggle in their workplaces in proud solidarity with the Palestinian cause over decades, and succeeding in drawing their co-workers into the fight against their bosses along the way. Today, we will hear from UAW workers who have all participated in different forms of shop floor struggle that are linked to this cause. Crucially, these fights were also linked to the material forces affecting them and their co-workers. The ensuing fights against the boss and the union bureaucrats who tried to interfere on behalf of our employers drew a broader and broader array of workers into the understanding that standing up in solidarity with Palestine is intimately interwoven with our own control, material well-being, and freedom as workers. This perspective is why we've emphasized a new strategy in UAWD over the last year, the formation and development of local chapters, in which UAW members inspired by our platform of class struggle can apply these ideas to their own conditions and fight the ruling class in ways most relevant to their present workplace experiences. We've paired chapter building with publishing and printing our publication, Daily Struggle, which we launched at the end of last year to feature our class struggle vision through shop floor stories and analyses of how UAW members and the working class can organize together. We've already done 2 print runs, distributing almost 10,000 copies at over 100 UAW workplaces, and our 3rd print edition is in the works for September. Different than a narrower vision of reform or activism, we believe that our focus should not be to change our union, though we see reform as a valuable tactic. Instead, our focus is struggling together with our coworkers to change our working conditions. An important lesson we hope to impart today is that while not every shop floor struggle is a victory, the losses can still meaningfully engage new layers of our coworkers and move them to contribute in the long term to this vital cause. Each of our first speakers and CONCON panelists are UAW members who will share stories of how they organized for Palestine solidarity, and each effort made important political gains. But none of the stories you'll hear today were a clear-cut win or loss. Instead, they illustrate the variety of organizing strategies that contribute to the political shifting of working class consciousness. Our focus today is on trade union activity, since UAWD is primarily connected to UAW workplaces and industries, but it is also important to understand that all sorts of political organizing occurring in our communities contributed to a shifting of consciousness over the last 80+ years. Our win at the convention also owes much to the countless workers who supported local solidarity efforts and bit by bit changed the way U.S. workers relate to Palestine. Today's event was co-organized by UAWD and UAW Labor for Palestine. UAW Labor for Palestine was founded in October 2023 to uphold the call by the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions for workers everywhere to end all complicity and stop arming Israel. UAW Labor for Palestine has spearheaded UAW 2325's cutting-edge Palestine Solidarity, uplifted the UAW 551 Palestine Solidarity Resolution, and generated ongoing rank-and-file pressure on UAW international leadership to condemn Israeli genocide and to divest from Israel bonds. It is a member organization of the Labor for Palestine National Network, convened by Labor for Palestine, which was founded in 2004 by union and Palestinian community activists to reclaim the legacy of working-class solidarity with Palestine in the United States, as reflected in groundbreaking statements by the League of Revolutionary Black Workers in 1969 and wildcat strikes against UAW leadership's support for Israel in the 1973 war, and which has long called for labor support for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, or BDS. And now to our event. In our first portion of today's program, we will be hearing from 4 UAW shop floor leaders who organized and fought for Palestinian solidarity in different industries, time periods, and regions. We're expecting our total program to run for about 80 minutes. After our first 4 speakers, we will hear from a panel of 3 members who helped lead UAWD's delegation at this year's ConCon. Then we'll take some time for a fundraising ask, followed by a longer conversation between Jeff Schuhrke and Michael Letwin. At the end, folks here will be able to ask questions of any speakers, share ideas, and be part of a broader discussion. And with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Alan Ayman. Alan is a former member of UAW Local 600 at the Rouge plant and co-leader of the 1973 Arab American Auto Worker Wildcat, and the first Arab Muslim ever elected to public office in Dearborn, Michigan. So please, take it away, Alan.
Thank you very much, Dave. First of all, I want to thank you guys for putting this particular session together, but and also for all of your work, and to congratulate you on your success at the convention. To me, it's historic. The action that we took in 1973. First of all, I want to tell you, because I already started my timer, and I want to stay within our time limit. But I would encourage everybody to read an article by our co-panelist, Jeff Schuhrke, excellent article titled "When Arab American Detroit Auto Workers Struck for Palestine Liberation." I read it in Jacobin magazine, published back in 2020. It's a great chronology of the events. My role, I think, is to share with you a little bit of my personal observations about how we organized and how we were able to reach some of the workers in the plant and convince them, not all of them, but enough of them, to walk out and shut Dodge Main's production that night, major plant in Detroit. The catalyst for, of course, was things that were happening in and around the community in which we organized, the Arab Workers Caucus, and that's what we called it in Southeast Dearborn. We become militant about the desire of the city to shut down and erase our entire community. So we had this militancy brewing, and then with the land acts in 73 and the other catastrophes happening in Palestine, we discovered, through Ishmael Ahmed, I need to acknowledge that the UAW had invested significant amounts of money in Israeli defense bonds, and we wanted to take action against it. In order to do that, the Arab Workers Caucus reached out to people in the plant to inform them. First of all, we did not know. The workers and the people who were paying the dues that were being shipped overseas did not know that was happening. First of all, to inform them that it was happening, and then to convince them that they needed to take action against that kind of activity. Obviously, it was a motivation, certainly among the Arab workers, about Palestinian liberation. That's for sure. But we had to so define the issue that we were addressing so as to relate it to people who really didn't know much about Palestine, didn't really care much about Palestine. So what we tried to do was to develop an identification of the kind of practices that the union leadership was taking. that were detrimental to the interests of the working people and the guys that were paying the dues. Shipping money to any foreign government, I don't care whether it was Canada or Britain, some great ally, was wrong. And certainly in shipping the money to Israel, made it doubly wrong because of what the money was being used for in the commission of genocide, which started way before October 7th, 2023. The catastrophe has been ongoing for 100 years. Anyway, we were able to connect with the workers, and it was a winter night. Leonard Woodcock was receiving the B'nai B'rith Anti-Defamation League Humanitarian of the Year Award because of the bonds. We picketed Cobo Hall where he was receiving the award. They snuck him in the back door. It was a bitter, freezing night. We stood our ground. They had Woodcock, I remember, on the news, on the broadcast news in Detroit, back near the back exit, which is where he was going out the back door too. But anyway, the reporters cornered him and said, well, they wanted to know what his reaction was to these workers taking this wildcat action. And he went into probably a 30-second, maybe not that long, but a long sound bite of what that he supported the state of Israel. He believed in the state of Israel, but the UAW will no longer purchase Israeli defense bonds. He capitulated that point of our issue that night. We felt very good about that, and then went to warm up and to thaw out. But again, I urge people to see and read Jeff Schuhrke's article. It's excellent. In it, he references another narrative that's pretty good by Dan Georgakis and Marvin Sirkin, Detroit, I Do Mind Dying, a studying an urban revolution. And I would also recommend Pamela Pennock, professor at U of M Dearborn, her book, The Rise of the Urban American Left. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you.
Thank you very much, Alan. If you have a minute, would you want to just say something about the strike as well? I know we can get into it later, but it'd be cool to hear a little bit about that before we move on.
I'm sorry, were you talking?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was wondering if you could share just a little bit about the Wildcat action in '73, if you have just another minute, because we'd like to hear a little bit more about that. But
Well, we were able through some of the workers that were still working. I was not working in the plant anymore. My time was in the Dearborn engine plant. But we had been able to reach the workers through the guys that were part of the Arab Workers Caucus and helped organize the caucus and that were still working the shop floor. These are the guys that actually stuck their neck the farthest out and really experienced a degree of jeopardy. Even in Jeff's article, they talks about the retaliation that was taken against some of the workers. We had attorneys that were willing to do pro bono work to help out with the defense of people because, and I don't know how many people took advantage of that opportunity, but we knew that the union would not defend them because in order to defend them, they would have to speak against the position that they had been taking. The walkout was monumental. We had almost 2,000 people out in front of Cobo Hall. I'm going to reiterate, a bitter cold night. And for people to come out and suffer through, our permit required us to leave Cobo Hall and march down to Kennedy Square, the old Kennedy Square. And we did our rally there. But as a spokesman for the event, I was able to reach some of the media and we got the story out. And it was an amazing response on behalf of workers who, in terms of the Arab-Israeli situation, didn't have any skin in the game necessarily, but who took a strong stand in terms of not allowing the union to do these kinds of actions.
that's amazing. Thank you so much, Alan. And we can hear more from Alan in the Q&A later for people who want to stick around. Thank you so much for coming by today and for sharing all of that. All right. Next up on our speaker list, we have Maya Leggett. Maya is a legal services worker in New York City and UAW Local 2325. She was a leader in her workplace, the New York Legal Assistance Group, or NILAG, during a strike campaign, which was in part fighting management's censorship of pro-Palestinian speech. So, Maya, please take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Alan, for sharing such amazing words. Very hard to come after that.
Yeah.
um, I wanted to speak a little bit about the actions we have undertaken on the shop floor at NILAG in advocacy of Palestine and the successes that we've had over the last year or so. Um, so firstly, I wanted to talk about worker grievance brought by workers wearing keffiyehs and the NILAG office. They had gathered together briefly to take a photo while wearing keffiyehs in support of Palestine and Palestinian labor unions. And they were shortly issued a written warning by management, where management was claiming that they had violated a policy of NILAGs that um, none of us had seen or heard of before, um, other than the poster policy, which I'll talk about next. Um, the grievance went to arbitration. And while the arbitration decision didn't ultimately rule in favor of our workers, and in spite of NILAG not having any specific policy prohibiting this conduct, um, the decision did clarify that while NILAG had the right to enforce this policy against demonstrations about a controversial topic, um, we the important thing about this decision was it did not go as far as worker attire. So we will continue to wear keffiyehs in the workplace in demonstration of solidarity with our Palestinian siblings. And the grievance
Maya,
is,
sorry, Maya, would you be able to speak up a bit? These people are having a little issues hearing you.
oh, I'm so sorry.
Um,
Is this any better?
yeah, that sounds better.
Okay, sorry about that. Um, so the important part of this decision was one that it didn't speak to worker attire. So we can and will continue to wear keffiyehs in the workplace as a show of solidarity with our Palestinian siblings. And the grievance itself, importantly, um, was made known to other workers on the shop floor through flyering, through lunchtime pickets, and it put management's discrimination in the spotlight. And this really galvanized workers to organize together. Um, One of the biggest actions in advocacy for Palestine at NILAG has been in protest of a policy that was enacted about a year and a half ago, banning all displays relating to the conflict in Israel and Palestine. And essentially, this policy was put into place after a complaint was filed to HR about a poster that said Intifada, um, and management was very quick to put into place this policy. And it's since been used to confiscate and physically destroy workers' belongings at their cubicles, which include posters showing a watermelon that includes a statement saying NILAG silences workers, posters of journalists killed by Israel, children injured by Israel, Palestinian flags, watermelon plushies, and much, much more. Um, in this action, several workers have been disciplined from mandatory counseling, verbal warnings, written warnings, suspension, and threat of termination. So far, I believe about 13 workers have been suspended without pay This action and this absurd and discriminatory and overreaching enforcement of the policy has really galvanized workers at NILAG in support of each other. We've been able to organize against discipline, not only through lunchtime pickets outside the office, but also this tactical disobedience in the workplace, by continuing to make displays in violation of this policy, with specific support for Palestine to continue um, not being silent about what is going on with this genocide. Um, we have workers who agree to be subject to discipline and to file individual grievances as an administrative burden to management. I think we filed 20 or more grievances. Um, we've organized a GoFundMe to support workers who lost pay while suspended. And this organizing has even led to what I would say is an uprising in middle management who've been openly castigating upper management over their enforcement of this policy and risking termination. This has been one of the most, I feel like, long-standing actions at NILAG by workers, and it's continued to show everyone what we can do when we organize together and we protect each other through collective action. And lastly, I wanted to quickly talk about our last bargaining and contract session this about a year ago, July. Part of the demands we made for our new contract was a free speech provision in the workplace. And we made this a priority because of this ongoing issue with the poster policy. Management turned that demand around on us and changed it to be a disciplinary provision, allowing them to discipline us for speech outside of the workplace, such as in our personal social media, for speech that violated NILAG policies, including the poster policy, and they explicitly meant it to apply to speech advocating for Palestine. This happened very close to our strike deadline. Many workers were upset and uncomfortable with the poster policy, but had not really participated in the worker action. This messaging from management to discipline us further and stifle speech outside of the workplace made workers furious and galvanized the authorization to strike. While on strike, one of our main messaging while picketing was to protect our free speech and our right to advocate for Palestine. We were able to bargain and include in our CBA a final free speech provision that does bar discipline for speech outside of the workplace. And this is just to show at NILAG an action of a small number of workers brings to light issues that others may not hear about or know about, shows the shop what power they have, galvanizes more workers to participate at all different levels, and showing them as they participate, they know what to do moving forward and the power we have over management. Thank you so much for letting me speak a little to this, and thank you everyone. Looking forward to hearing from everyone.
Thank you so much, Maya. And thank all of you for fighting on the picket line for such an important kind of provision that we don't usually hear about in our union activities. So thank you for sharing that today. Next up on our speaker list is Dylan Kupsch. Dylan is a PhD student at UCLA. Dylan currently organizes with Students for Justice in Palestine and rank and file for Democratic Union, UCLA RNF, and UAWD. Dylan is a rank and file member of UAW 4811. You can take it away, Dylan.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction and thank you to everyone for being here. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about my local, and especially I think it's in light of the momentous victory that we had UAW wide and a lot of the organizing for Palestine that's really come from the shop floor. And a lot of the overarching reactions in pushing the movement forward are a reaction to the on the ground shop organizing. And so I think I want to start in 2014. There's a famous UAW 2865. We were one of the first unions across the country to pass UAW, a membership-wide vote on BDS. Over 65 or two-thirds of our membership voted in 2014, which is quite a different time to support BDS, both locally within the union, but also, within the international and in our bargaining demands. And many of them committed to upholding the principles of the academic boycott in their teaching experience. I bring this up because I think that it offers a really counteractive of like what happened in the international, where when we had UAW 2865 endorsing this, the international went in and blocked the result of the election. And I think something quite stunningly is they worked with Caterpillar and many of the bosses to try to stop that. Within the recent years, there's been a lot of resurgence after the escalated genocide. And really this started on the ground, and it went from a campus by campus basis at UCLA, at UC San Diego or UC Davis, UC Berkeley. Um, the membership actually debated and voted on resolutions at the shop level to support UAW-wide BDS, support a bargaining strategy around Palestine, and also importantly to try to organize a membership vote on endorsing these principles of BDS. At the local level, the leadership opposed, but a vote passed overwhelmingly. The union member, the following these resolutions, the local leadership tried to nullify, it canceled the future meetings and nullified the ability for campuses to pass resolutions. To stop the growing momentum, UAW released a referendum, and it was basically to affirm the actions of the executive board in calling for a ceasefire and taking related actions, but still falling short of the concrete resolutions and the goals within the resolutions. So following the encampments that happened later that year, and not getting too deep into what happened during the encampments, UAW positioned to strike over the result of those encampments, especially the violence that happened over at UCLA. And really, the main goal of the encampments was the same or the main goal of the strike was the same behind the encampments. We sought to do a strike for divestment. And it was really the result of rank and file workers that the strike happened in the first place. I remember at UCLA, there was many workers who said, "I'm going to wildcat unless you do something about it." And that's really what made it so that the strike actually happened. To kill the strike, the UC judge shopped. They found a conservative judge and got an issuance of a TRO. And alongside an ongoing summer session where students were moving out, and it really killed a lot of the momentum of the strike. UAW ended up dropping the original demands of the strike, and in response to the UC dropping theirs. Now UAW is completely absent on Palestine. I think there's a lot of rank and file momentum around Palestine, but UAW 4811 has been absent itself. There was a statement that they condemned SJP and their related actions. They have been allowing the university to criminalize protest, picketing, speech, and striking, failing to contest the meaningful repressive policies and defend members from discipline, and they refuse to meaningfully engage with the demands sought out by the original resolutions to try to further the movement during bargaining itself. And lastly, as I see in the chat, UAW did endorse Zionist politicians, especially those who worked to restrict the rights of members who engaged in the encampments and protested for Palestine. I just want to end with a little bit of a detour, but thinking about the strike itself, what I think is really impactful for me specifically is really the rank and file energy around the strike. So now, whenever you see a media article surrounding UAW endorsing Palestine, it always comes down to these like few pictures at UCLA, and they're always the UAW rank and file for Palestine flag signs. I find them pretty meaningful as someone who grew up within that strike, or came up within that strike. But I think it really shows the rank and file momentum because the local didn't design the signs. It was rank and file members who designed the signs, crafted the signs, and ultimately picketed with the signs despite the local at every instance trying to stop them. And I think as we're further going down, the UAWY divestment vote is really just the start of what rank and file members want to achieve.
Thank you so much, Dylan, and shows in many ways the gap between what a the bureaucratic layer may say publicly. It has shifted a lot in the last couple of decades, but obviously a lot of their actions still need to be pushed every step of the way by our members and our workers at the rank and file level. So thanks for sharing that. And our final individual speaker for this portion is Marcie Pedraza. Marcie has been a union electrician since 1999, starting in IBEW Local 134. In 2013, she joined UAW Local 1268 and worked for 3 years at the Belvedere Assembly Plant. And since 2016, she's been a member of Local 551, the Ford Chicago Assembly Plant. So please go ahead, Marcie.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, great. First, I'd just like to thank UAWD for asking me to be a part of this. I'm also a proud member of UAWD.
I think you turned your video off by accident.
Oh, shoot.
No
Sorry. Okay, am I back? Yeah.
There you go.
I'm also a proud member of UAWD, so thank you for having me be a part of this panel. Shout out to my co-panelists. I think all of our stories, victories, and challenges are important to learn about in this ongoing fight. But this, just telling my story, back in December of 2023, I was elated to hear that the UAW called for a ceasefire in Gaza, but I felt that, we could take it a step further. And so I wanted to present a resolution to my own local here in Chicago. I drafted a resolution just by simply copying and pasting what I had seen other, resolutions that were being passed across the country from UAW Labor for Palestine locals and from the direct call from with their 5 demands that I believe somebody put in the chat earlier, we'll speak on later. And this was just a very last minute organizing on my part that made it happen because we hadn't had a meeting in a couple months because we didn't have quorum. So I was just kind of rushing to get this done. And it was in January, just a few minutes before our January meeting started. I spoke with other members about the resolution that I wanted to present. And I got someone to second it, and it passed overwhelmingly with only 2 against. But I thought, how am I going to talk about this or convince rank and file workers to care about this? Back then, there wasn't a lot of coverage about it, and I stressed the urge for folks not to watch mainstream media only, and to get educated, and mention that this is our tax dollars that are paying for this genocide. And, while our government keeps saying that there's no money for the unhoused, healthcare, education, or infrastructure, yet they have billions of dollars for endless wars, genocide, and now, ICE thugs who continue to kidnap our neighbors and terrorize our communities. I also stress that, we should stand in solidarity with workers around the world because we join picket lines, we don't cross them. And one person in the meeting said they supported Israel. That was all they said. And I also received some positive feedback, but lots of questions after the meeting, mainly from, folks that just didn't know about this, what's been going on. And it's been going on for a long time, not just these past couple months. So talking about some of the pushback, which, I got from a group called the Illinois Zionists, which I didn't even know existed. They tried to rescind our resolution, which, I didn't know. They were unsuccessful, and even my own local leadership wanted me to take it down after it was shared online because I told them to put it on our letterhead so that it, was official, like Local 551 letterhead. And I'm like, I can't take it down from the internet. It's there forever. You can't just say, oh, I'm sorry, Twitter, X, whatever. Can you take that down? Because, I might get in trouble. But I got called an anti-Semite. I got called a terrorist. My own regional director pushed against divestment when the vote was close, but not in our favor to divest back in May of 2024. He said, it would cost too much money. I said, how can you put a dollar on human life? And some in our social media groups have given hostile pushback as well. And I just want to segue into what we're going through now. like today, we have these extreme storms and flooding, and climate catastrophes are happening more frequently, and our homes are getting flooded, the roads on the way to work are getting flooded, the air is toxic with smoke from wildfires, and sometimes it's so hot, we can't even work in these plants with no air conditioning, but they still, still the line has to keep running, right? And yet there's no money at home to invest in worker safety, and Chicago had a record number of tornadoes this year, something like 62 tornadoes, in a city that they said we'd never have tornadoes. A lot of people are still trying to make ends meet, and while fixing up damages from them, from these climate catastrophes, and so these issues are workers' issues, Um, so just to conclude, we as workers, we outnumber the bosses and politicians of the ruling class, and we got to keep fighting and let them know that this is not in our name. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to hearing the rest of the speakers. Solidarity forever, and que viva Palestina libre.
Thank you so much, Marcie. Thank you, Marcie. Thank you, everybody. Let's get tons of hearts, fire, clap chats for everybody for sharing their stories. It's a lot of inspiring stuff, touching on a lot of different ways that shop floor organizing can run into roadblocks, but ultimately the power of the workers, we have it within ourselves to get through those. And I encourage everyone to stick around to the end, and we can have a broader chat, and people can, people have raised some questions already. Please, keep it coming at the end. It'd be great to have a longer conversation with people who can stick around. And so soon I'll be passing over here as we get set up for the next panel portion. I'm going to hand things over to my other UAWD co-chair, Andrew Bergman, who is one of the leaders of UAWD's delegation to the Constitutional Convention, and we'll be speaking with a few of our other leaders who are working there to help make the divestment vote happen, along with our other organizing at the convention. I know he's setting up some Zoom spotlight stuff right now. He's also handling our Zoom admin today, so give him a big round of applause for that as well. Not an easy job. But it looks like we've got everyone collected, and I'll pass things over to Andrew. If you've got to go, yeah, go for it.
Thanks, Dave. Very excited that everyone's here. As Dave said, I'm Andrew Bergman. I'm so grateful that you all are here to celebrate with us and learn about our class struggle vision that drove our divestment victories, as well as the complexities and the setbacks and all the inspiring struggles that have been a part of building a working class movement for Palestine over the years. As Dave said, I'm UAWD's other co-chair. I'm a member of UAW Local 22. I work in assembly at the General Motors plant in Detroit. And before that, I was a longtime member of the UAW as a higher education worker. I'm really excited for today's panel discussion that's coming up. We have three UAWD members here who led the fight at this year's Constitutional Convention, bringing our class struggle platform to the convention floor and ultimately winning an historic vote on divestment. First, we've got Shelly Pires, who's co-lead of UAWD's CON Strategy Committee, a member of UAW Local 2325, as a paralegal and legal services worker in New York City, and a leader of UAWD's Local 2325 chapter. Welcome, Shelly. Then we've got Mike Davis, who is current capture and former president of UAW Local 2021 as a parts worker in Ohio. Welcome, Mike. And finally, we've got Jeremy Bunyaner, a member of UAW Local 2325 as an attorney and legal services worker in New York City, and one of the co-leads of UAWD's CON delegation and UAWD's financial secretary. Really grateful to the three of you for being here. Unfortunately, we only have about 20 minutes for this panel, which, I'm sad about because these three folks have so much insight to share. And we learned so much through this fight for Palestine solidarity, the CON, and the years struggling up to it. So if any of you here are interested in learning more, please check out UAWD's CON Strategy Roundtable. I'll drop the link in the chat. And you can also check out a great interview that several of us did with Max Alvarez and the Real News Network, which was republished in these times. And if you check out the Strategy Roundtable, you'll see myself and five other UAWD leaders who were leading the delegation talk through the nuts and bolts of our strategy that UAWD built, how organizers can understand our class struggle political foundation that enabled UAWD's effort to divest from Israel bonds, and our analysis of what we encountered and how that strategy fared. And we hope that'll give rank and file militants across the labor movement a leg up when they engage in struggles. So you can check out a much longer version, but we're gonna do the highlights today and kind of get into the weeds a little bit. So I want to start off with my first question for the three of you. Can you tell everyone about the class struggle strategy that UAWD brought to the Constitutional Convention and how the fight for solidarity with Palestine fit into our broader program, which prioritized fighting against layoffs and fighting ICE?
Yeah, I can speak briefly to this. Hi, Shelly. I was one of our sort of leads at the ConCon, but also one of the co-chairs of the strategy committee for the ConCon, because this had been something that several folks throughout UAWD had been thinking about and strategizing around for several months leading up to the ConCon. And part of how the program was formed, right, is that, the ConCon is a space where there are all these delegates who are, largely, bureaucrats from their locals who are maybe gunning for like a higher leadership position or maybe even a staff position or something. So it's not necessarily the most like militant space in the UAW, but nonetheless, if we go there as UAWD with our, class struggle platform, we saw an opportunity to use not just the space itself, but the opportunity to discuss politics leading up to the ConCon as an opportunity to sort of help build our movement and find like-minded folks amongst the UAW. So all of our amendments, which we have 8 that we pass at different locals, they really touch on our platform and specifically this key question of how do we win fights for the international working class, right? Through class struggle, through struggle on the shop floor. So as Andrew mentioned earlier, the 2 priority amendments we had were on fighting layoffs, which are a huge issue in the auto industry, through work sharing, right? Instead of the boss getting to control, who essentially like people's livelihoods when the money flow isn't what they expect. Instead, we share work and everyone gets to, keep pay and their livelihoods. And we also had another one on abolishing ICE and fighting state attacks on workers, which that one we may talk about a little bit later, had provisions to essentially protect people or essentially create mechanisms where people could vote, do a proper strike authorization vote to go out on a political strike if ICE is attacking their communities. And we had many, others. I think, the link to the ConCon program, Dave just posted, so you can sort of see what we were thinking there. But we were very much not going with a sort of like, let's see what reforms we can get. Like, let's try to, just try to get like what do we think that everyone in the room will find palatable? We were not on that. We were like, we're not going to dilute our politics. We're using the space to both, spread our politics, and using the process of getting these resolutions passed to also spread and discuss our politics, and potentially find like-minded folks. Do folks want to add anything else?
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm wondering, Mike, if you can jump in, because one of those 8 was our Palestine solidarity resolution, and our full Palestine solidarity resolution was actually much broader than just divestment. And that's because of what Shelly said, that we wanted to bring a political program that militant trade unionists could understand, to actually engage our coworkers in the fight. So Mike, can you tell us a little bit about that and your other sort of reflections on our strategy?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Mike Davis, Local 2021. The broader language included severing our ties with the Histadrut, which is Israel's racist trade union, set endorsement restrictions for candidates, that are complicit in the genocide in Israel and other imperialist wars. And the most important thing, I think, was the supporting our union brothers and sisters in the weapons industry if they decided to take strike action. And that was the one that I really feel like I got pushback from people when I, go outside to smoke a cigarette after it. I have international reps walking up to me trying to tell me how illegal it is. And I'm arguing with them, telling them how is it illegal for us as union workers to do it if the military can do it? As conscientious observers, they can bow out of stuff. So why can't a worker do that? But I think that in that room, Shelly hit it on the head. There's a lot of people there that are just looking to climb the ladder, move their way up, and they're willing to do whatever those international reps tell them. And those people had their international reps coming up to them and telling them it was illegal also, but they don't want to push back. They don't want to tell them to, fuck off. Excuse my language, sorry. Yeah. I wish that one had passed, but I think that if we're going to take something like that there again, we need to plan for this attack we get from the international reps about illegalities, and most of the time they're just talking out of their asses. So
Yeah, and when we get to our second question, hopefully Shelly can reflect on. We also got pushed back for our ICE resolution being illegal, and I think that was actually part of our strategy that we were going to be like, you're going to say procedural issues you have, like you're going to get into the weeds because you want to kill it and make things smaller, and we're going to talk about what we actually need to make the struggle that we think is important into a reality. So they went procedural as we expected, and we went political to actually try to convey people. Jeremy, do you want to jump in with reflections on the strategy and specifically the sort of view from your local chapter?
Yes. So, hi, Jeremy, Local 2325. Understanding sort of the nature of the UAW's Constitutional Convention, we didn't expect anything necessarily to pass. That said, what you heard from the prior panelists is a long history of, shop floor action and that has built over time. And so, and including in Local 2325, so, which is, in part through Palestine activism, like Maya was talking about, as well as just a lot of that sort of organizing has gotten to a place where we have a UAWD local chapter, with a pretty few dozen members, and we were able to get, I think, all of the resolutions sent to the Constitutional Convention. So we knew they were all going to be there. That said, it was good. Multiple locals were actually able to send these resolutions to the convention because the exact resolution Mike stood on the convention floor and tried to pull was the Local 2325 resolution. And then what we ended up actually getting passed was the resolution sent by Local 7902. But that's sort of like strategic thinking on the floor, like, okay, this didn't work, let's try this, was really possible because of our local chapter, the organizing we've done as UAWD in the chapter, trying to push this class struggle unionist outlook, because we were able to get almost our entire delegation to the convention to be UAWD members. And that was through an election. We had to get people to actually, it was a mail ballot election. We had to get people to check their mail, which is easier said than done, and then fill out a ballot and actually mail it out. And not just be on autopilot where the same, leaders get elected, but actually we're saying we're going to push for divestment, fight for Palestine, amongst, fight ICE, etc. And so going there, it's like not only do we have a mandate, we also had a shared purpose, which then let us sort of coordinate on the floor with other UAWD members who maybe in their locals, like such as Mike's, there's not a chapter, but he got elected as a delegate, but he's like him, maybe one or two other people. It's not as cohesive a thing, but because we had such a large delegation, we actually could try to cohere all of these like-minded people in UAWD and actually even outside of UAWD to fight for this political vision that we were putting forward on the convention floor.
Thanks, Jeremy. And I also just want to take this moment to give a shout out to the other two CON Strategy Committee co-chairs who have built this strategy over the last several months, Dave, who you've been hearing from, and John King. And then I also want to give a shout out to the 2325 chapter anchors, Navruz Baum, Estefania Rodriguez, Chris Brown, and Shelly, who, I mean, that I don't think we can understate. It may seem wild, but we only had 20 people who were UAWD members at the convention. But because it's not just the 2325 folks, there were folks like Mike, there were dozens of others, but that chapter, having come out of the split of UAWD and the establishment of a class struggle program, it enabled that chapter to form, and that chapter brought in such a group of rank and file militants that could anchor our presence there. These things, there's no way to separate them. So I wanna jump into our next question because I think it even shows more clearly how our strategy fared with these kinds of pieces set. Can you all share your assessment of how our strategy actually, we know we had this success, but more broadly, how did it fare at the convention? And how did bringing this principled program for militant trade unionists enable us to win this narrower victory of divesting from Israel bonds?
I'd say that the strategy worked really well for those people that are like-minded with us to get our message out to them. But maybe I was on them, but in my region, when especially the original Palestinian language, when we stood up, there was nobody. There was like maybe 10 people or less that stood up in our region, and I mean that really sucked. But all of it, though, I feel like comes back to what like in region 2B we're mostly Midwesterns, there's not a lot of, I guess, I'd say activism going on in a lot of our facilities. So those people that get elected to that, they're all the ones that want to move up and be greater, and they're not going to stir any kind of out stuff, they're not going to stir anything up. But then when you have stuff that comes up like that, that's really important to others, that's where we got our solidarity at. And I'm really glad that we did bring up the stronger language first, and get that conversation started. And, I was nervous about reading it because in my mind, there's no way this is going to pass. And I was glad that Andrew took me aside and was like, listen, Mike, it doesn't have to pass. It just needs to start the conversation. But at the end of the day, though, sitting in 2B, watching nobody stand up for it, ICE watching nobody stand up for that was really sad. And it really does feel like, we have a problem in our union right now where we have people that join unions for the benefits and absolutely do not agree with the solidarity of it. And it's sad when we go into settings like that, and the people that are supposed to be, the leaders of our union are in that room with us, and they don't even have that in them. That they don't care about these class struggle issues. The only thing they care about is putting money on their table. And we heard about that from some of the armament workers who were screaming out about how this is their bread and butter. And I thought that was disgusting. And I will say, if that's your bread and butter, I hope you get food poisoning, for real.
Yeah, Mike, and you're definitely not alone in that, in feeling that way. And I mean, we should remember, like, the folks who are at these conventions, they're not, the broader working class. They're these bureaucrats who get elected to basically, maintain the status quo. I'm hoping other folks can jump in because the response that Mike shared to the Palestine resolution was actually very different than we received to the ICE resolution that we brought, which was a little surprising to us. So yeah, go for it.
I'll just speak very quickly, just because there was an arc to how our approach to the convention went, and I think our strategy worked really well. We initially brought out this fighting layoffs resolution, and it's a 4-day convention. It's a bunch of people in a room, so like there is a human aspect to it. You are actually speaking, people are listening. It's not so mechanical. And we push this, look, why are we doing layoffs? Why can't we just accept, why are we just accepting the company line? Why can't we fight this with work sharing? It didn't pass. Talk about Shelly just spoke so amazingly about fighting ICE and why we need to do it as unionists. And that really got people going because, surprise, surprise, people hate ICE. And actually, trade unionists hate ICE. Working class people hate ICE. And there was support for it, but the powers that be said, no, this is too much resolution. There's too much, rank and file power that would be created by this resolution. We can't actually support it. That's over the course of a couple of days that conversation happens. But because people, as they had to speak against ICE, they'd say, fuck ICE. But it was something we heard a lot. It elevated the political conversation. So when you get to a point where we're just talking about just divestment, after already saying no to the things Mike was talking about, this broader resolution, people felt like, oh man, we really need to do something. And so actually pushing the politics, push the conversation forward, and let us actually achieve this goal, which, I mean, maybe Shelly can speak to it, but the divestment win, it wasn't by a huge margin. It wasn't a guaranteed win just because, the people have been moving that way in favor of Palestine against Israel. There was not a guarantee we were going to win that.
Yeah, and I guess I just want to say, I think it's amazing that we won this, and I think it's amazing that because we had enough delegates who were locked into our strategy and what we were there to do, that we were sort of able to stay true to what we were there to sort of use the space to do, to put our politics out there, while also being able to adapt to the conditions of the convention, which were actually slightly more favorable than we expected, in order to then have this divestment win. That was, I think, a huge success of our strategy. But something that I guess I wanted to really hammer home, and I think I sort of gestured at this a little bit earlier, is just I think that there are probably still some folks who think that if we had just taken out some of the more illegal, contentious stuff out of our, let's say, out of our abolish ICE resolution, which did get pulled out of committee and did get a debate on it, even though it was voted down, unlike a lot of other things that people tried to pull out for debate that were, softer, easier, more reform-minded, right? And people wanted to talk about abolishing ICE. I think there are maybe people who would argue that it didn't pass. That means it's a failure. That means that maybe we should have, put forward language that was more likely to pass, right? Maybe we take out the bit about, you can call a strike authorization vote if ICE is in your communities. And instead we say you'll pledge to engage in some sort of action, or you'll pledge to support a politician who's anti-ICE or something. Or similarly with the Palestine resolution, maybe we just sort of tone it down a little bit and sort of put forward something that we think will pass. The reason why we didn't think it wasn't our goal to do that is because it was precisely our goal to get people across the UAW, one of the largest unions in this country, to be having the conversation about how do we use our labor power to take back control from the capitalist billionaire Epstein class, whatever you want to call it, through our labor power. When are we going to be ready to do that? For what purpose will we do that? And the fact is that ICE is so abhorrent to so much of the working class that it took 2 days of, the sort of bureaucrats at the top who I think it's basically my understanding is that the United slate, the slate that John Fain is running on, has these caucus meetings every morning of the convention, and that they sort of develop here are the talking points for how you're going to oppose this, but in a way that doesn't make it look like you support ICE. They had to do all that because ICE is abhorrent to workers. So they have to do all this no, it's about the legality of it, brother. It's illegal to call a strike on this. And that is precisely what we need to be talking about. That is what we can't tiptoe around. We can keep talking about we're going to put out more statements. We're going to put out more resolutions. We're going to fund more politicians and whatnot. At what point are we going to talk about, as workers, shutting shit down if the state is attacking us in our communities? That needs to be a conversation that is being had on a much larger scale. And what space do we, where can we most have the captive audience if not the con? So I want to really bring that home, because I think even amongst folks who are, supporters of like what we've done as UAWD, I think some of that I fielded some questions from folks who I think didn't always like fully understand like what our strategy was, and so that's kind of what I wanted to hammer home.
Yeah, thank you, Shelly. I think that's such a great place to wrap up, because I think we were immovable because we weren't trying to just convince a few leaders, work in the inside, address, and it meant we couldn't win everything, but it meant that they couldn't co-opt us. They couldn't take away from the politics and the argument. And that made it clear that at the very least, divestment had to pass. And I can't say enough. But I was like, it was incredible. Everyone should click this link and watch Shelly's speech. Sorry, I know we've gushed over you a lot about the speech already, Shelly, but I genuinely I don't think we passed that divestment resolution without Shelly's speech shifting like the moral compass and the political sort of outlook of the convention. And that's why it was impossible for them to go into some back room and say this and that like that. We should again check out the roundtable. You'll see that there were other forces at this convention whose strategy was to just kind of work on the inside, try to convince Sean Fain and his new administration caucus coalition that they should pass reforms around direct elections. And they failed because they got sucked in and they got churned up. And unfortunately, they weren't able to make it work. And that couldn't happen because of the sort of moral clarity. Yeah, we're over time, so we have to wrap up. But I'm so grateful, Mike, Jeremy, Shelly, for all the work you did and for being here to talk about it. And yeah, we will have them on for the Q&A, but please check out the roundtable and the interview that we did with Max Alvarez, so that you can hear more from them. And yeah, thanks for listening. I'll bring back on Dave for our next segment.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everybody, not just for talking today, but for bringing that fight to the con floor and changing the future for UAW and for a lot of workers along the way. So it was a very inspiring. I wasn't able to make the con, so I had to watch from afar, and it was not a close vote, and it was a very heart-stopping moment, and it was extremely exciting to get that news. So thank you all for that. And so with that, we're gonna head into the final portion of our event today. Thank you everyone for sticking around so far. I'm going to introduce the first host of the day for here to Michael Letwin. Michael is a former president of Local 2325 and co-founder of Labor for Palestine, and he'll be speaking with Jeff Schuhrke. And Michael, you can take away the intro from here.
Thanks, Dave, and greetings to everyone here. It's really an honor to be here with UAWD, with UAW Labor for Palestine, and everyone else from all the different locals and other unions, and also to be organized folks. And so, the speakers so far have presented such a rich, view of what the work has been and how this work is being done. And I just want to try to see about summarizing some of those presentations into the following kind of points, I think, that really are overarching. First, that we in today's rank and file Palestine labor solidarity movement are all really links in a chain. And we stand on the shoulders of those who came before. So UAW Labor for Palestine, which I'm very proud of, was founded in 2023 as part of the National Labor for Palestine movement, which in turn was founded in 2004, so 22 years ago, to reaffirm and reanimate the Palestine solidarity practiced by the League of Revolutionary Black Workers and the UAW Arab Workers Caucus in the late 60s and early 70s in Detroit, who in turn echoed the cutting-edge anti-Zionism of Black liberation movement as reflected in Malcolm X, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Black Panther Party, all of whom took a very clear stand for Palestine, and which really affected many of us in the movements of those times in the 60s. and really introduced us to Palestine, even if we didn't already know about it. And of course, above all, to Palestinian popular resistance, which goes back, more than a century and certainly continues today. And so I think it's essential as a point of principle and a point of understanding to acknowledge each of these components in this movement, both within and beyond the UAW. So that's one point. Second point is that Palestine solidarity has always been a rank and file movement. If labor leaders could be relied on to do the right thing, there would be no need for any of the formations I just mentioned. And meaningful change comes from below, here and everywhere, and really from below only. And that's true in any labor struggle that you can mention, and it's certainly true within the Palestine solidarity, labor solidarity movement. And to be effective, that rank and file solidarity must be well organized. Examples of which include, or recent examples include, the 2+ years UAW Labor for Palestine campaign for UAW divestment from Israel bonds, which was supported by Engineers Against Apartheid, by the way. And of course, the UAWD CON victory, which, as you heard just a few minutes ago, was extremely well organized. A third point, as shown in this entire history, including the 2024 UAW 551 resolution that Marcie spoke about, Mike Davis from UAW 2021 on the floor of the UAW convention, and the unanimous support there from UAW local 600 members, even though their local had not voted on or supported the resolution originally. But the point really is that Palestine is not, contrary to what some claim, a white-collar worker issue only, and that we will not be divided against UAW sectors. Point 4, support for Palestine is solidarity, not charity. As the PGFTU in Gaza, which issued the statement that we've been referring to, the Palestinian Trade Union Call, reminds us, quote, "Your struggle for workers' rights in the United States is inseparable from our struggle against occupation and colonialism. True labor solidarity is demonstrated through actions, not just words. Therefore, we call upon you, the American labor unions, to translate your solidarity into effective actions that go beyond statements and speeches and create real pressure to stop this dirty war." And so 5, Palestine is union business. Not, again, because of charity, but because an injury to one is an injury to all. Because we walk picket lines, we don't cross picket lines. Because our tax dollars fund Israel. Because our workplaces arm Israel. Because our unions, too often, as in the case of the UAW, have funded Israel. Because ongoing US-Israeli genocide in Palestine comes from the same bipartisan perpetrators of war on Iran, Lebanon, and the entire region, of US imperialism in Latin America, of the escalating ICE abductions, murders, concentration camps, deportations that Marcie and others have spoken about, because of attacks on workers here in the US. And because as long as this country spends trillions to carry out these atrocities, there will never be income equality or any other kind of justice in this country. Point 6, framed this way, that is to say, in basic labor terms, Palestine isn't, quote, divisive, but rather is a unifying, inspiring issue that has only ignited, organized, and mobilized workers around all labor issues to here, to bread and butter, and back again. 7, and I'll be relatively quick here. Words are cheap, and ceasefire resolutions from unions like ours, the UAW, however welcome, are not nearly enough. Real solidarity means endorsing the 2005 Palestinian-led BDS picket line. And in practice, this means following the examples in labor of Block the Boat, of the ILWU West Coast dockers and workers around the world who refuse to build or transport weapons destined for Israel. It means severing ties with the Israeli Racist Labor Federation, the Histadrut, as the Canadian Labor Congress just did recently. And by divesting, of course, from Israel bonds and industries connected with Zionist settler colonialism and occupation. And finally, 8, or rather, I've got 3 more here, and it's not finally, but it will be soon. 8, we will not be silenced. I'm proud to say that UAW 2325, my local, has been at the cutting edge of Palestine solidarity, despite a vicious Zionist witch hunt featuring not only our employers, but also the infamous House subcommittee that conducts these kinds of witch hunts. Point nine, no one, including us, as you heard earlier, actually expected the UAWD divestment resolution to reach the floor, let alone pass. But it did. So the lesson, I think, is what the students in Paris said in 1968 during their world-shaking uprising. And that was, quote, "Be realistic, demand the impossible." Or as Marcie put it, "Viva, viva Palestina." And 10, and finally, Labor for Palestine will be holding onboarding sessions for new members. To get involved, please do email us, info@laborforpalestine.net. We would love to hear from you and work with you and support and uphold and uplift all the work that we're doing together. So having said all of that, now I'd like to dive deeper into this long-term struggle. And to do that, we're fortunate to welcome Jeff Schuhrke, labor historian, author, among other things, of No Neutrals There, U.S. Labor Zionism and the Struggle for Palestine, published by Haymarket Books last year, and which there's a link to buy in the chat here. And if you haven't bought and read that, please do. It's really groundbreaking and so appreciated. So Jeff, welcome. Great to have you here, as always. And to start off, to pose this question, Zionists and others often claim that Palestine is somehow irrelevant and divisive within unions, not union business. Why are we talking about this? But is Palestine even a new issue in US unions? What's the origins, the true origins of that issue here?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And I just want to quickly say thanks to UAWD and UAW Labor for Palestine for organizing this event and inviting me, and thank all of you for being here. I recognize a lot of the names, a lot of really amazing organizers, activists, and it's an honor to be on here with all these other terrific speakers today. So yeah, that question, thank you for mentioning my book, No Neutrals There. If there's one main takeaway of that book, it's that Palestine has always been a labor issue, at least going back over 100 years. This goes back as early as 1917, when the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, held their national convention, and they passed a resolution supporting the Zionist aim of establishing a Jewish state in Palestine. And this resolution was passed by the AFL only a couple of weeks after the Balfour Declaration, which anyone who knows anything about the history of Palestine understands that's a really important moment in this history, when the British Empire effectively endorsed this policy of Zionist colonization. And it's important to point out about that example, 1917, when the AFL passed this resolution in support of Zionism. It was part of the larger goal of the AFL to try to get the working class behind US entry into World War I. And I say that's important because throughout this century-long history of US labor's institutional, material, political support for Zionism and the State of Israel, it's always been part of this larger strategy of US labor officialdom trying to support US imperialism and militarism more generally. But yeah, so that's the origin, 1917, and then you could go through the whole 20th century of many major unions giving millions and millions, eventually billions, and possibly more money to even well before 1948 and the Nakba, giving money to Zionist colonization projects, to establishing Jewish exclusive businesses and workplaces and housing developments and so on that were deliberately excluding the native Palestinian people. And then into the actual 1948, the establishment of the State of Israel through the Nakba. This was a moment when US labor was at the height of its power, when 1 in 3 workers in the US was unionized, and union leaders were household names, and unions had real political clout, and they used that to lobby for Israel in the early decades, 1950s, 60s, well before AIPAC was really even a thing. And some historians have even said that the AFL-CIO was the pro-Israel lobby before AIPAC, and many examples that I detail in the book, but also examples, and some of which we've heard about today, of rank and filers pushing back on all of that and standing in solidarity with Palestinians. But yeah, I mean, when we often hear today critics or Zionists or others saying, why are unions talking about Palestine at all? They never said that over the last 100 years when unions were giving so much, again, financial and political support to the Zionist project. So it's clearly like what they're upset about is not that unions are getting involved or talking about Palestine, but that they're showing some, sympathy and solidarity for Palestinians instead of supporting Israel.
Thanks, Jeff. And so following up on that, the UAW, former UAW president Walter Reuther, who was the UAW president for decades into the late 60s. Under his leadership, under his leadership, the UAW purported to be a major supporter of civil rights in the 1960s. It came out against the Vietnam War, at least on paper, as did, by the way, the Teamsters. But yet at the same time, as you were discussing, the UAW was at the forefront, the leadership that is, of supporting labor Zionism. So, I mean, how did those two things get squared? I mean, what was going on in their mind? Was their support for the civil rights movement even genuine? Did they do anything about the Vietnam War in practice, or is this all sort of a piece?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the context of who some of the major US labor leaders were at this time, the 60s, early 70s, particularly like the leadership of the AFL-CIO, George Meany and others, these were, very right-wing, imperialistic, militaristic, and, driven solely by anti-communism kinds of people. And so Walter Reuther and the UAW in that period, by comparison, sometimes they look more progressive and liberal, and they kind of were by comparison. But as you said, Reuther was a huge supporter of Israel, and have the UAW, of course, spending lots of money not only on Israeli bonds but other kinds of donations to the Histadrut to help build all kinds of public facilities that again were Jewish only and were built on lands that had just recently been forcibly taken from native Palestinians. And Reuther was, he was there at the March on Washington in 1963, one of the only white speakers at that march, and supported the idea of civil rights and racial integration. But when it came to the broader, Black liberation, Black power movements, he, like many other liberals at the time, were not willing to go that far, and especially when it came to the obviously Black members of the UAW, Black auto workers in Detroit, who were pretty much always put in the most dangerous, worst paid jobs in the auto plants, and had very little to no representation in the union. And most of the union officials of the time were white, didn't pay any attention, didn't care about their Black members. And this is why you have the origins of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers in the late 1960s to challenge not only the racism from their bosses, but the racism from the union leadership, which included Reuther at that time. And of course, as we've talked about today, the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, also part of their broader politics was solidarity with Palestine, and calling out Zionism as a colonial movement, as it is, which hadn't really been done so much before in the U.S. labor movement. As the League of Revolutionary Black Workers held a series of wildcat strikes and were actually trying to, becoming more militant and shaking things up, this is why the auto companies started hiring more and more recently arrived Arab immigrants, many of whom didn't speak English, brand new to this country. They thought, well, they're more easy to exploit. But then the Arab workers took inspiration from the Black workers and, as Alan was talking about, formed the Arab Workers Caucus. Of course, a really important wildcat strike of the Arab auto workers in 1973 to protest the UAW's purchasing of Israeli bonds. So you had this, solidarity between the Black and Arab auto workers, rank and filers, trying to change not only the workplace, but change the union. Yeah, and then in terms of Reuther's like opposition to the Vietnam War, of course, it came pretty late. Only in 1968, after Lyndon Johnson, Reuther's close ally, announced that he wasn't going to run for re-election. Now it was safe to come out and speak out against the war, which he should have and could have done much earlier. And yet, yeah, it was primarily rhetorical, just like the ceasefire statements, important, but not going any further than kind of just rhetorical calls for an end to the war.
Also, following up exactly on that point or that connection, I mean, how do we understand the fact that the leaders of the pro-ceasefire unions, like the UAW, the NEA, the CWA, SEIU, having come out for ceasefire, nonetheless continue to resist rank and file membership calls to go beyond that rhetoric, use workers' power to shut down the genocide, as we have been urged to do by the Palestinian unions. And the fact that you really, even the ceasefire resolutions, don't even reference the Palestinian trade union call.
Yeah, and a lot of the ceasefire resolutions, when you go back and read them, they spend a lot of time condemning Hamas and saying everything Hamas did is a evil, horrible atrocity. And then, and it's unfortunate what's happening in Gaza. It's a humanitarian crisis, as if an earthquake hit or something like that. So, but again, yes, the ceasefire, calling for a ceasefire, especially in that moment in the late 2023, was, an important thing to do. But it should have been seen as a starting point for more action and actually, answering the call to solidarity from the Palestinian trade unions, saying, don't participate in the manufacturing or shipping of weapons or anything else that will help the Israeli war machine. And I know, Mike and Shelly and others talked about this already, and it's, the simple answer, of course, is that it's much easier to put out a statement to try to appease the rank and file who are speaking out and say, look, okay, we put out this statement, we did something, now that we consider the matter closed, let's move on. That's a lot easier than actually taking, organizing and doing something more material, like divesting, like getting to the point of some kind of actual workplace actions to shut things down and actually hinder the Israeli war machine and the US war machine, which are, go together, obviously. A lot of it, what you hear, and it's, not totally untrue, is like the legal structures that we operate in the US, where, unions can be fined and obviously workers can be fired. So there's, to have real solidarity with Palestinians, we would face backlash, repression, and so on. But that's true throughout history of any kind of class struggle, liberation struggle, solidarity struggle. It's not risk averse. It never is. And or it's not risk free. Of course there's risks. Of course there's going to be backlash, repression, and so on. And that's, I think most high-ranking national union officials, not just UAW, but many of the others, are afraid of those kinds of risks. They're not really, they don't see, they don't see the labor movement necessarily as being, and then maybe they don't have enough faith in the membership, or maybe not enough faith in themselves to really lead those kinds of really difficult struggles. And, and then part of it also is, for many of these high-ranking union officials, they're quite close to the U.S. government, and particularly the Democratic Party. They were very close to Biden, the Biden administration. They might be, at most willing to put forward a kind of friendly disagreement about some policies, but to actually, grind up the gears and actually shut things down, that's, a bigger risk. They don't want to burn those bridges with the Democratic Party. They don't want to face the wrath of the U.S. government. So it's all of this, I think. And also just they don't see Palestine as, I guess, an important enough issue to be willing to go that far. Again, they had to be pushed and cajoled just to put out a statement calling for a ceasefire. So, but that's why it's, so important what all of you, what UAWD and UAW Labor for Palestine and Labor for Palestine more broadly, and many of the other rank and file caucuses and other unions are continuing to organize and push and bring more members, bring more rank and filers on board, standing in solidarity with Palestine, so that it, eventually, and like the victory at the Constitutional Convention, you eventually get there, but it's like this long, hard struggle. Obviously, we can't, and everybody knows this here, we can't just expect the union leadership to automatically, do the most radical militant thing. They have to be pushed by the rank and file to get there.
Right, especially because it's not like they're doing what needs to be done, even as far as bread and butter issues for unions are concerned, right? I mean, as other people have talked about here today, I mean, U.S. private sector union membership is about 6%, in 2026. And the UAW's obviously lost, hundreds of thousands of members since I first knew about the UAW in the late 60s and early 70s. And yet, there's been really virtually no resistance. Now, that came from the old administration caucus, which controlled the UAW for decades and decades and decades until the election of Sinn Féin. But even now, and this sort of goes with the ceasefire, the sort of the gap between the rhetoric and the reality. You have Sinn Féin talking about, used to talk at least about a general strike in 2028. You're not even hearing that so much anymore. And, are we even going to be here in 2028 unless we are actively resisting at every level? Because it's not just, the immediate contract, although that's critical. It's not just Palestine. It's not just Trump. It's the entire direction the things are going, and it's all of the sort of the hellscape that we're looking at, and yet there's very little, certainly, institutional resistance, whether it's labor or anywhere else. And whatever resistance is taking place is happening on the ground. I mean, the anti-ICE movement has been such an inspiration in that way, in Minneapolis and Los Angeles and Chicago, and so many different places. That's where the real resistance has taken place. Same thing is true around Palestine, the millions of people, even in this country, that have marched for Palestine. And the fact that the overwhelming majority of people in this country, including workers, support Palestine, not Israel. The huge shift that represents. And yet, actually getting our institutions, including our unions, to deal with any of this in a meaningful way really is not happening. And so I think it is the point that whether it's 50 some years ago with Detroit or 50 some years ago later today, we're facing the same kinds of issues, the same kind of struggles. And just when we were talking about legality and illegality, the fact that the sit-down strikes that the UAW is very proud of in 1937 were illegal, right? I mean, so much of labor organizing is inherently illegal, and yet there's this thing thrown back at us that, well, it's not legal, and they're going to do something to us for it. I don't know how much time we have left for this section. Dave, can you just give me a time check?
That's just about what we had set aside. So
okay,
yeah.
So Jeff, I want to really thank you as always. Your work is so important. You've been on so many panels. Whenever called upon, you're there, and much respect to you, and much respect to everyone here for all the work. It's really important. It's really heartening. It makes all the difference for us to be coming together like this to uplift the work that all of us are doing. Not selectively, not sectarian, but rather all embracing for this work from below. And so, thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And thanks, Mike, for running that. Thanks, Jeff, for being here. We're wrapping up now. I want to thank again all of our speakers for the day. We heard from Alan, Maya, Dylan, and Marcie at the top. I want to see lots of hearts and claps now. Thank everyone for coming out here. We had our Con panelists, Mike, Jeremy, Shelly, with Andrew moderating. You just heard from Michael and Jeff. And all of us today were speaking to the power of shop floor militancy, sharing different views of worker solidarity with the Palestinian cause. I want to thank UAW Labor for Palestine for co-organizing the event this with UAWD. I would also like to again thank everyone who donated to support our rank and file organizing. And finally, I want to return to a point I raised at the top that everyone here has said, but it can't be repeated enough. This divestment victory in UAW owes just as much to the amazing organizers and activists inside and outside unions who have been fighting for Palestine every day in every avenue possible. Just as Michael said, we're here to uplift all the work that everyone is doing because this is what it takes to win. So thank you all so much. That's the event. It's concluding there.